The gore and creature movements and the pregnancies on fast forward that this guy causes with women, the grotesque tentacles that come out of women's bellies, all of that stuff was stuff I scripted in advance. And I remember being down in Baltimore on the soundstage, and there was a woman, the actress was sitting against the corner of a built set, and there were 8 guys with hydraulic levers and mechanisms that would make her belly expand, almost like 9 months of pregnancy on fast forward. And these 8 guys are using all these incredibly involved hydraulic levers to make all the different things work. And one of them turns to me and he says, "This is really fucked up, man. Like you wrote this?" And I was like, I don't know, I was just typing. That's the great thing about screenwriting. You type it and then it becomes real. I had gotten out of college. I had always done pretty well on papers I had written, and so I figured I would be a writer of some sort, a journalist, a novelist, a playwright. And I happened to stumble upon a Writers Guild of America booklet that told how much they paid for movie scripts and one-hour television shows. And so the minute I put down that book, I knew what my profession was going to be. I must admit to having had mercenary motives for becoming a film and television writer, but over the course of time, I came to understand the craft of it and enjoy it for artistic reasons more so than business reasons. But at first, it was a job. I spent a lot of my career both writing and producing television, where writers move up the ranks, and as you gain more power and stature in the business, you start to produce your material more. With the feature films, I was lucky enough to, in some cases, be included as a producer, partially because I had developed the material myself. That wasn't the case with Species 2. I'm just a writer on Species 2. But most of my producer experience comes from working in the television business, where writers cast the show, we choose the music, we establish the look of it, we hire the directors. So I have had lots of experience producing many, many hours of television. I was working on a MGM show called Outer Limits. You were writing like a different episode. It was an anthology. You were just doing a different little movie every week. And so I was over there at MGM working on that show. I wrote a couple of episodes of that show. And I said to my agent, you know, I'm sitting over here at MGM. Maybe you should set up a meeting with some of the feature executives. And so my agent set up a meeting, and I went over to meet an executive, and she said, "Oh, you're doing science fiction. Well, you know, we're looking for a writer for Species 2. And maybe you'd want to go talk to the executive who's handling the Species 2 account." And so I said, sure. And I went over and I discovered that they were developing 2 scripts for Species 2. That's sometimes what studios will do. They've had a hit movie with Species, and now they double develop. They develop 2 scripts. And so I found myself in competition with another writer. Another writer had already been hired to write Species 2, and I was the second guy hired to write Species 2. And so that's what I did, and it turned out my script won the lottery.
The extraterrestrial vulnerability experiment has one central goal: to discover a means to defend ourselves against the alien species should they ever return to Earth.
My original concept for Species 2 was the idea that in the first movie, it was mentioned that there were 3 embryos that were developed from this alien DNA, and one of them grew, and that was Natasha Henstridge. So the end of the first movie ends with some cheap spin-off setup of a rat at the end of the movie, a rat who might be infected with the species bug, and I thought that was so stupid. And so the two embryos that had been mentioned, I thought, well, the United States would then grow those two embryos into species creatures and have them in serious lockdown to study the alien physiology. And so I imagined that the embryos would be grown, and one of them would be Natasha Henstridge, and the other would be Cindy Crawford. And so what I imagined was Species 2 would actually be about two women aliens, and they would stand side by side like this, and so that it would say Species, and the two would be the two women forming like a Roman numeral 2. And the studio loved that idea. The guy who was producing the film thought that the idea maybe was, he wanted something more outrageous, something darker. And my idea, of course, was that one of these beautiful alien women would escape from the lockdown facility, and then you'd use Natasha to go chase after her. So there'd be a good species and a bad species, and they would chase each other. And that, I think, would have been fun, because it would have been two chick aliens, which is always fun. Instead, when the producer wanted me to go darker with the material, I ended up positing a mission to Mars that goes awry, and the Mars astronaut comes back, and he's a ladies' man, and he's been infected with the species bug, and he starts going wild and having sex with all these different women. And so they have grown Natasha Henstridge to check her vitals and have her on lockdown, and the team from the first movie uses Natasha to track down this male species guy. The problem is, I realized in retrospect, is what made the first movie, Species, so successful was that it was like a chick who's going around and screwing guys to death, which is kind of amusing, and you can sort of take your girlfriend and have a date night movie. But when the species alien was a man, it made it more like a date rape movie, and less palatable to the general mass audience, which may in fact be the reason it's turned into a cult movie as opposed to a mainstream hit.
Is that all I am to you? A laboratory animal?
I want you to understand that the reason I took this job was to make sure that these experiments were done with regard for you.
You know, to be honest, because the studio was double developing the movie, they had one writer writing a version, and then I had my version. They didn't dictate very much what it was they wanted. The producer, Frank Mancuso, was the guy in charge of it. He had produced the first movie, and it was pretty much me and him talking about what the movie would be. I think that it was obvious we would want to use Natasha again, since she had been such a hit. It also became apparent to us that Michael Madsen and Marg Helgenberger and some of these original actors were willing to come back. So I always saw that we would use that unit again to go pursue a species creature. And then my notion, of course, was that Natasha is teamed up with them this time to go after a different species creature. So that created Justin Lazard's character, the astronaut who goes to Mars and catches the species bug. The studio all along the way was pretty cool with the project. I think that they chose my script to go shoot. We went and made it down in Baltimore, Maryland. Peter Medak is an incredible director who's got a list of incredible movies he's made, from The Craze to The Ruling Class to Romeo is Bleeding, you know, a huge array of movies over his long and illustrious career. Peter and I are still very, very good friends to this day. We worked on the script together. I would sit out in his backyard with him, and we'd talk about the scenes and talk about the script and make adjustments. Lovely guy, really, really fun. Interesting filmmaking choice for this movie. Peter's not a science fiction guy, though he had made The Changeling, which is a fantastic horror movie. And we just had a blast making it and remain friends to this day. Peter and I have worked together on Hannibal and continue to work together as long as we can.
Get the tether!
Containment breach. Alert.
We're locked in here!
Electronic tether.
I will say this, I was the only writer on the project, from the pitch, to the development of the script, to the shooting of the script, to the post-production of the movie. I don't know whether that's because they liked me and thought I was capable, or because the studio was too cheap to fire me and hire anybody else. But in any case, I stayed involved with it. I remember, you know, the normal number of rewrites that go on when you're trying to make things work for production. There wasn't any suggestion that the script be overhauled at any time. There's no nightmare story from it that has to do with doing rewrites. I was involved with watching the cuts and talking to Peter about the cut of the movie. While we were cutting, the president of MGM, the guy who was head of the studio, left the job and a new guy took his place. And that new studio president now involved himself with watching the movie. And so that new studio president and the producer of the movie were not necessarily the best of friends. So those two guys didn't love each other. So I was in the cutting room with Peter Medak and with the new studio president, and we were watching the movie. The climax of the movie is Natasha's character fights with Justin Lazard's character. It's Syl versus Patrick. And it's the praying mantis concept, which is to say they're fighting, but they're also fucking, and the female ends up killing the male in the process of that fuck-fight situation. And that's how Patrick gets defeated in the movie, is that she fucks him and then kills him. But she's mortally wounded herself. So I have her body is taken back to the ambulance. She's barely alive. She's going to die. Maybe she's even dead. And she's loaded onto the military ambulance, and it revs up. It's going to drive to the morgue or to the top secret place where they're going to do an autopsy on her body. But as the military ambulance is starting up, you see her belly, and it starts to swell, and it starts to swell, and you realize, even though she killed Patrick and suffered a mortal wound herself, he somehow impregnated her during that fight. And so the creature that's going to burst out of her belly is 100% alien. In other words, it won't be half human and half alien. It will be 100% alien, and that'll then set up the next movie where our team will have to go against, you know, a 100% supercharged species alien. So I wrote that scene, and it would end, of course, with a belly swelling towards camera, and then bam, and go to black. And so I was quite happy with the scene, so I sent it to the president of the studio, and I sent it to the producer, and to await their comments. And so I got a call, and it said, it's the studio president on the line. And I said, yes, I'm here. And the secretary put him through. And he said to me, I really like your scene. That's a really good scene. And I said, thank you. And he said, but there's one, I want you to add an extra element, which is, you know how the team has been killing all of Justin Lazard's alien love children? You know, they've been killing all these alien spawn he's created. Well, how about they miss killing one of them? And when you're on Natasha's belly, you turn and one of the alien kids is in a corner of the ambulance. And so I said, well, you know, that's kind of, I don't love that, because it means our team kind of screwed up. Like they went into that barn and they were killing all these alien children that were going to destroy the earth, and like they missed one. It makes them seem like idiots. And he said, well, there were a lot of alien children. You could easily miss one. So I said, oh boy, that's really stupid. I don't want to do that. But I couldn't say that to him. So I said, okay, let me talk to the producer. So I called the producer and I said, the studio president wants to have an alien love child in the corner of the ambulance. And the producer said, that's really stupid. It makes our team look like idiots because they didn't kill all those alien love children in the barn. And I said, I know, it's really stupid. And he said, well, you know, I have a different idea. And I swear to you that he said this. He said, when I was making Friday the 13th, Part 8, the woman walks into the kitchen, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this cat jumps on the table. And he said, Chris, the test audience totally pissed in their pants. They were so scared. So when her belly is growing, you just have this cat go and jump and land on her belly. Now all of a sudden, the studio president's idiotic love child idea sounded like genius. And so I said, well, but where does the cat come from? Like, we're in an ambulance. And he said, well, you know, they're out in the woods. You know, there could be like a cat out there in the wild. And so I said, okay, well, you know, let me talk to the studio president about this. So I called the studio president back and I say, hey, you know, the producer has this idea that like this cat jumps onto Syl's belly, like, yeah, and lands on the belly. And the studio president says, that's the fucking stupidest idea I've ever heard. Where the fuck does that cat come from? Where's a cat doing in an ambulance? I said, I don't know. And he said, you know what? I'll tell you what. I want that alien love child in the ambulance. And so I called the producer back and I said, look, now, of course, the alien love child, I'm just fighting for that idea. And so I say to the producer, hey, the studio president is totally, you know, he's not going to change his mind. He wants that alien love child. And the producer says to me, you know what? I don't give a shit. Let him have that alien love child. I want that cat. And so if you watch the last scene of Species 2, you will see two of the stupidest fucking ideas that anybody's ever come up with in the film business moshed into a scene that has my name on it as the writer. But I will say in retrospect that maybe the reason I'm sitting here doing an interview about the movie being a cult classic, which could also be code for a really bad movie that everybody still kind of likes, it may be because of those two men and their creative genius. So who knows? Species 2 effectively ended my science fiction writing career. Not because of any negative perception of the film. It actually just was something that I moved immediately into writing crime fiction. I've run the show Law & Order Criminal Intent. I've worked on Hannibal. I've written lots of pilots, most of which are not in the science fiction realm. At the same time, telling that story about the cat and the love child in the ambulance has gotten me so many laughs from my friends. And sometimes I'll even tell the story and then I'll have queued up the very last scene of the movie for people to watch. And so it always, whenever I have a writer's room of people or I'm, you know, starting a new show, I might bring up that story, and it remains perhaps my funniest Hollywood story. So in some ways, I'm glad it happened.